Welcome to the afternoon session of the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting of June 4th, 2024. We are resuming this afternoon with public hearing item number 4. And this meeting is being held in our hearing room at 1 Center Street, also being held via Zoom and live streamed on our YouTube channel for anyone who would like to watch remotely. And with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Preservation, Corey Harala.
All right, thanks. We'll resume with public hearing item number 4. That's LPC 24-09252, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 553, Lot 19, 44 West 8th Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District. This is a building built in 1956, and the application is to demolish the existing building and construct a new building.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ward Dennis with Higgins Quays Barth & Partners. I'm joined by Margaret Grossman and Ramon Mason from the ownership, and Idan Noir from In Workshop Architects. So, am I controlling? Oh, there we go. So the project is 44 and 46 West 8th Street in Greenwich Village Historic District on the east side of the district, close to Washington Square Park. You can see the existing building on the left. It is a one-story taxpayer building constructed in 1956, not a building for which the district was designated, and not a contributing building to the district. The proposal is to construct a 5-story apartment building with ground floor commercial and a setback penthouse at the roof level. This is a view of the south side of the block. To our left in this photo, to the east, is a new building that is currently under construction that was approved by the Commission in 2019. Because that building is scaffolded and under construction, all of our street views have that building rendered in so that the scaffolding's not in the way. Our building immediately to the right, to the west, is a 50-foot wide lot. And then to the right of us is a pair of tenements constructed in 1876. And then further to the right on the block, going west towards 6th Avenue, you have a series of taxpayer and tenement buildings. The taller buildings on the right side are actually 3 combined buildings. Historically, our site was home to a 5-story tenement, which you see on the left in the left-hand photo, and a 3-story brick stable. Both were constructed in the late 1870s, early 1880s. The 2 lots existed separately until about 1953, when they were bought by Seafair Restaurant, which combined the lots, demolished the buildings, and constructed the new building that you see in the landmarks designation photo on the right, that 1-story restaurant building. Looking a little closer at the history, the 1940s tax photo on the left, obviously, of the historic buildings. We have historic plans from 1956, which clearly show that the new building that was constructed fully demolished the existing buildings. There was a demolition permit in 1955 and the new building application in 1956. And then in 1971, on the bottom left, the Landmarks Commission approved an application to redo the facade. So the existing opening pattern that you see in the bottom right, 2019, when the building was last occupied, has existed since 1971. Just as a preview, Idan will go into detail on this, but wanted to show you the overall design now. It is a 5-story red brick apartment building. The ground floor is retail and residential entries clad in terracotta. You can see that the building to the left of us is 6 stories. We're a few feet shorter than that. We are 5 stories, obviously. We have taller floor-to-ceiling heights. And then we're a few feet taller than the pair of tenements to our right, but fitting very comfortably within the height of buildings in this section of the block. In terms of massing with a setback penthouse and bulkheads above, I think very similar to what was approved on the building adjacent in 2019. You can also see, and we have models on the table in front of you, but you can see that the brick patterning uses chamfering to create a tremendous amount of depth and texture on the facade. And we also have on the top right quadrant of the facade, you can see that the brick chamfering shifts from right to left, and that is an acknowledgement of the 3-story stable that was there previously, and also helps break this facade down into 25-foot modules. In terms of stepping back and looking at the block more broadly, we do have many brick buildings, obviously, on both sides of West 8th Street. Most of them are in either 25-foot wide modules or in paired 25 feet to 50 feet modules. So our building fits nicely in with that, and fits nicely in terms of height and massing with many of the other buildings on the block. In terms of the brick texture, we are using a Roman brick, which you can see at the front of the table here. It is a Peterson brick, hand molded. It gives a great amount of texture and depth to the facade, and that's something that we see throughout the district. We have a couple examples here, and then some detailed photos showing many, many different brick patternings and how brick is used to really enliven the facades of buildings throughout Greenwich Village. And of course, the commission has approved many new buildings within Greenwich Village. We present some precedent examples here, just showing the use of brick in a very contemporary design, similar that has been approved throughout the district. And then in terms of the storefronts, as I mentioned, we have a terracotta at the storefront base with brick above. Throughout the district and throughout the city, really, you see, particularly in the later 19th century buildings, this mix of materials. So the base of the building is, in this case, and the picture on the left is actually our neighbor immediately to the west, cast iron with sheet metal and wood infill, and then, in this case, brownstone above, or on the right, iron with brick above. So this contrast of materials and colors between the upper part of the building and the lower part of the building is something that's very common throughout the district. Very often, obviously, these buildings have projecting cornices at the storefronts. In our case, because of the chamfering of the brick, we're actually carving away a bit at the second floor and at the storefront level to create that relief and texture within the facade. So with that, I'm going to ask Edon to come up and talk to you about the design in detail.
Thank you, Ward. Thank you, commissioners. We're happy to be here today. My name is Idan Naor from In Workshop Architecture. Yeah, so, I think the design process for us really began with what Ward alluded to, which was this realization when we walked through the district that something that we really wanted to express. We wanted our design to somehow resonate with this, what some call as a hodgepodge, what we found to be a fantastic kind of eclecticism in the neighborhood, particularly on West 8th Street. We noticed things like varying building heights. We noticed on 6th Avenue, very deep recessed storefronts. We noticed this amazing energy where, from a pedestrian experience, you kind of walk through and you're constantly curious about what's around the corner because it's all different. And so, going back to this, so you can see our site here in yellow, and it's roughly 50 feet of frontage. When we began the analysis, I think we looked at a Sanborn map from 1904, and I think there was a Paris map from 1854. But we noticed that it was two 25-foot lots, and so that's really what we pivoted our kind of design process on is thinking, how can we, you know, be sincere at once about being a 50-foot building, but at the same time, kind of bring back some of that broken up mass, express the individual lots. So when we started our kind of diagrammatic analysis of what was on our site before the taxpayer, so this is, you know, circa 1914 from what was on our site, you can clearly see the two individual lots. You can see the building on the left, very different height from the building on the right. And we also found it curious that the building on the right seemed to articulate further this breaking of the lot into two symmetrical kind of bifurcated 12.5 foot dimensions. And so that got us thinking about how does a building express this kind of broken down mass that seemed to be what the streetscape was doing. And especially if we looked at some of the old historic photographs, there was even more of this energy that we found enticing today. So we started to really hone in on that. We noticed the verticals at the, you know, at the ground level, there seemed to be a certain rhythm to them. So we were really trying to avoid doing something monolithic as much as possible while maintaining sincerity about the approach. Another thing we're highlighting here is the historic void, not because it's, you know, historically significant per se, but from our perspective, the pedestrian experience lent it that it was equally important to us. It emphasizes the massing that was there before. So we wanted to highlight that here. On this slide, you can start to see kind of a sort of amphibian drawing, folding in the analysis of what was on our site. If you look up at the top right quadrant, that's the historic void we were referencing. And if you look at what we're trying to do here, it's to explore how many bays. You know, we looked at a lot of different iterations. One of the last ones was five bay approach. We landed on the 6-bay approach because being a symmetrical number, that allowed us to connote this kind of the individual lot, the 25 footer as opposed to the 50. And then the other thing that we tried to do is think about, this is the power of my words. But we tried to think about the verticals and how the verticals can come down. So we started to articulate just through brickwork, this kind of, you know, reference to what was there without really trying to replicate it. We tried to look at the ornate brickwork found in the district and use that as our guiding principle, using that as a kind of language, the vocabulary that we found in the district that we were trying to express. So we went with engaged pilasters that come down and kind of emphasize this rhythm that we found really curious. We looked at, again, I think there was a, is it called Lifetime Market on 6th Avenue? And that seemed to have a very recessed storefront that we found curious. So we started to look at the code. And we really pushed the limits and the extents of what the code allows us to do here with push and pulls of the storefront. So we broke it up into 6 bays, half of which are recessed as much as the code would allow. And we hope that that kind of creates and amplifies this pedestrian experience that we were connoting. And with hearkening this kind of ghost of the past, of this different massing, this broken up, we could have also changed the cornice. One of our previous iterations did that. We ultimately landed on an approach that emphasized, again, the sincerity of being a 50-foot building. We like the fact that the cornice at the top is in dialogue with its neighbors. So we have a historic tenement on the right with a very pronounced cornice. Interestingly, it also is bifurcated, so kind of connoting this 25-foot scale. And then we have our new neighbor that's still in construction on the left. So going from what's a little bit more of a contemporary cornice on the left and bridging what's more of a historic cornice on the right, we found this to be a kind of interesting juxtaposition for us that we hope sits harmoniously with its neighbors. The other thing that we tried to look at was obviously the height. The floors we couldn't get aligned because we're all doing different things, but we made note of the storefront level. And then the other thing that is worthy to note is we started to think about the materiality. So we have a brownstone, beautiful historic tenement on the right. We have a proposed gray brick on our neighboring construction on the left. So we wanted to do something that was different. We could have easily extended or replicated either one of our neighbors, but we chose to juxtapose with this kind of beautiful, what we found beautiful, deep kind of fire red orange brick with Roman proportions. made by Peterson Tegel of Denmark, which started to really organize how we design the facade, because each engaged pilaster, for example, is one run of brick. So that really started to orient the whole building once we chose the proposed brick. This was a pivotal moment for us. The image on the right is the historic site. And if I ask you to squint your eyes, you might be able to tell that our proposed monochromatic view on the left begins to articulate the original massing. Again, without replicating it too much, but we hoped would kind of bring back some of that, and especially thinking about the pedestrian experience. You see the verticals coming down, you see the recessed storefronts, and we hope that in this way, someone who might be curious enough to pass by the building, maybe for the 100th time, might notice something at the top, but not being, too belligerent about it. So we hope that it's nuanced, but still interesting. So this is looking towards 6th Avenue, the southwest side. And then this is looking southeast. So you can really start to see the articulation of the top right quadrant. And this is the full perspectival elevation of our building in color. And then this is a rendering looking at the, so you can see here, we're starting to think about materiality more carefully. We went through a lot of back and forth about the storefront. We had a few meetings that we tried to address feedback from, and I think it's actually made the design better. One of the interesting comments that we received was about the storefront and the way that it transitions into the residential. And so we did two things. One thing is that we gave it more of a horizontal band to pronounce it. So we pushed up, given where the slab was, the brick as much as we could. But we really, we tried a few different approaches. One was to go with a kind of more typical projecting cornice. When we tried it, we found that the cascading effect of the brick when it meets seems to be a little bit more truncated when we did that. So we ultimately landed up on something that I think is pretty interesting in section. You'll see it. It's almost like the ghost of a cornice. So when you look at the section, the brick and that very minimal recess ends up looking like a cornice in section, but we still hope doesn't detract from the cascading kind of chamfered brick that we're putting a lot of effort into. This is looking towards 6th Avenue. Sorry, the other one was looking towards, I think, 5th Ave initially. Anyway, this is looking southwest. And you can start to see how the brickwork and the setbacks and the chamfer becomes a stage set for light in a way. And what we really found curious about the model, which is one of the reasons we made an effort to make one, is if you take a flashlight or any source of light, you can really see how the quadrants kind of come into expression at different times of day. And in terms of materials, we're proposing standing seam, zinc panelized bulkhead at the top. We have a sample for you today. We're proposing Peterson Tegel, the Columba brick that we also have for you today. And we're proposing a terracotta panel for both the upper level penthouse and the storefront. This is our overall street elevation. Here we can see the cornice, and this is a good opportunity to show how we're creating the differentiation and the articulation in that top right quadrant. So you can see the varying setbacks using these specific brick dimensions. You can see how we're articulating the depth in the facade. We have soldier course cornice that we'll go into soon here. So we have a cast coping at the top. We have soldier courses for both the cornice as well as the top of the lintels. We have accentuated or engaged pilasters in stack bond. The windows are high performance triple pane simulated double hung. We have the notorious bird friendly glass on the windows. And then we have the chamfered in soldier course as well. This is a good opportunity to talk about what's happening on the ground floor. So we have all the way at the left, the egress stair exit. We have a residential entrance, second one over from the left. Moving over towards the right, we have the community facility with decal signage and the transom. We have then 3 bays for the retail with the entrance all the way on the right. And we're proposing blade signage for the retail only. And we're proposing an engraved building address for the residential inside one of the terracotta panels. Here you can also see what I was mentioning earlier. We've pushed the limits of the code with articulating the depth at the storefront. So we have roughly 3 feet recess for those bays, and we're going with roughly 1 foot for the, so to speak, non-recess bays. Here we're showing you the location of intercom, the blade sign, and we're showing you that we're calling out for the camera housings to match the terracotta. This is the view again looking towards McDougal. And then this is our rendered view where you can see things in a little bit more light. You can see this cascading of the residential brick as it meets the storefront. Oh, another thing that we addressed, we had a community board meeting a couple weeks ago, and one of the interesting comments we got there was about articulating the bulkhead in the storefront in a more pronounced way. And so previously it was 8 inches, and we're actually happy to have received that feedback because we believe this is better. It's at 18 inches now, and it reads like a stronger base. And then this is just showing the penthouse having the same terracotta as the storefront. And again, so the materials we talked about, the metal cladding is zinc. So we have the face brick that we're showing you here today made by Peterson. When we turn the corner, we're going to modular brick by Glengarry. Very similar in color. It's the small sample that we have for you as well. And then in terms of the rear, you can see we have a terrace for the 2nd floor. The commercial goes almost out to the property line. And you can see our rooftop terrace. True building elevation of the rear. Elevation drawing of the rear. This is a good section or elevation to look at the neighbors. If you look at the right-hand side in the cornices, you can see our relationship to both our neighbors. Likely as well here. Building section. Rooftop plan. You can see the mechanical equipment at the bottom left with enclosure. And I'd like to note also that our initial pre-application meeting yielded some feedback about the bulkhead level. And so we did a lot of work. We moved from an overhead traction elevator that was much taller, I think 7 feet taller, to an MRL elevator to bring it down as much as possible. We had a corner post elevator and we moved to front and rear. So that made us have to do a lot of gymnastics with the floor plans. But we're ultimately happier that we were able to squeeze it down as much as possible. We also had an ERV up on the roof, and that was largely the size of a small school bus. And so that was painfully relocated to the cellar. And here you can see a rooftop of the bulkhead showing condensers and mechanical equipment. This is a section through that elevator bulkhead showing the height and the space requirements inside. And the last portion is our visibility studies. So you can see a key plan here. We'll start with all the way on the east, looking over from the 5th Avenue side with view 1. As we move closer, everything kind of disappears. As you move closer, you start to see a little bit of the elevator bulkhead. This is a frontal view. And then moving over towards the 6th Avenue side. And as you keep moving, you start to see a little bit more by virtue of having low neighbors to our west. And then we took one extra one from just north of Waverly Place on 6th Avenue. You can see a glimpse in between these buildings. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I have two. The first one is, what type of bird safe glass are you using, since I realize this has been a bit of an issue?
Yeah, so we looked, there's a few options. There's either acid etch, ceramic frit, or UV filters. The UV, we've done some research in terms of pricing, and it's come back. I don't know what market forces dictate this, but it's about, I don't know how many times more expensive than anything else. So we'd like to use that aesthetically, but it might be cost prohibitive, in which case we would use, I think acid etch would look nicer typically. Ceramic frit would be, I think, plan C.
I totally understand, having gone through that discussion many times myself. The other question, I was feeling like the ground floor felt squat. And I realize it isn't that low, but your typical floor to floor is higher. And with how the design is, it basically, were you height limited that you couldn't make the ground floor taller, or were there other reasons?
It was, I mean, it's, I think it's roughly floor to floor 13 and change. Really the residential portion dictated the floors, and then we tried to just get as much as we could before the setback. So we have relatively tall floor to ceiling heights.
Thank you.
But your street wall, there's a street wall maximum height.
It's
that you're-
65 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're there.
We're just a little bit below.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Right. One of the reasons is we have one less floor than we could technically.
Okay. But your floor to floor height on the ground floor is the same as the other floors, or is it taller?
To be honest, I'm not sure exactly how it relates to the buildings, but I do know that the storefronts roughly align. You can see the horizontals for our neighbors.
Okay.
I looked at the elevation, the ground floor is 13 feet 2, and then the upper floors are 11.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right. We'll see if we have any public testimony and we'll come back to you. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak on this item? All right, noting that there isn't, I'll turn it over to Gregory College to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a few attendees with their hand raised. The first being John Graham for the Victorian Society of New York. John Graham, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Graham for the Victorian Society of New York. We are pleased to offer our support to the inventive apartment building proposed for 44 West 8th Street. The 4 light windows, with use of alternating decorative brickwork, not only inform a modern sensibility to a historically influenced design, but also present a very clever interpretation of and nod to the buildings that once stood at that address. The ground floor entrances and storefronts are pleasantly proportioned and create a distinct base that's in harmony with the upper floors. The building fits well into the existing architecture of the street and offers a subtle connection to the plot's history while accommodating the needs of a more modern purpose. Well done. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Chloe Gregoire from Village Preservation. Chloe Gregoire, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Okay. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good day, Commissioners. My name is Chloe Gregoire, and I'm speaking on behalf of Village Preservation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Village Preservation does not object to the demolition of the 1950s taxpayer building, as we are not aware of any specific architectural or cultural significance to the structure. We also find the scale, materials, and basic design of the proposed new building to be appropriate, with the exception of the contrastingly angled windows at the upper right quadrant of the primary facade. This gesture toward acknowledging the historic void is not effective and instead creates an awkward condition that appears out of sync with the rest of the facade. One could make the argument that this space should remain a void, or that the design might include a feature that legibly interprets it, but orienting the windows in opposition to the rest of the facade only makes the design appear disjointed without conveying anything meaningful about the site's history. We believe that a new building can be completely appropriate at this location and contribute to the character of the Greenwich Village Historic District. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any other hands raised in our attendees list, so I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 2 recommends approval of the demolition of the existing non-contributing building, approval of the ground floor apart from the bulkhead, provided that any additional signage be reviewed by the Landmarks Commission staff or at a CB2 public hearing, denial of the 8-inch bulkhead and recommends that it be higher in keeping with the usual historic proportion, denial of the modern style brick and recommends that brick of a more historic proportion be used, and approval apart from the size of the brick of the design of the upper facade, the windows, the penthouse, and the rear facade. And with that, I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, all right. So the community board essentially recommends approval, but for the height of the bulkhead and the brick size and type. Okay, so would you like to respond to those comments?
Yeah, so we had a really good conversation with the community board, and as Edon mentioned, one of their comments had to do with, we had a very low bulkhead on the storefronts. At the base of the building, we had also been spending a lot of time with Landmark staff discussing how the storefront is detailed and designed, and based on the community board's comments, we then looked at that bulkhead, raised it up, I think you said to 18 inches, so 10 inches taller. And that really made a lot of difference to how the base of the building felt, and it just sort of grounded the building so much better. So we were happy for that. The other concern that the community board had was on the proportion of the brick. This is a Roman brick, longer, thinner. It's certainly, we showed many examples of many different brick types throughout the historic district. This is, I think the commission has seen this particular kind of brick on other projects in this district and other districts. We think it is a wonderful material, in part because it is handmade. It does give a much more textured feel to the facade, even in a contemporary facade like this. So we think that the brick is perfectly appropriate. And then with regard to the discussion about that top right quadrant, it is a very subtle thing, and it is intentionally so. Edon mentioned, and we certainly went through many iterations of how might we detail this facade, and what are the bigger moves here, including different cornices, splitting corners, that kind of thing. I think you used the word belligerent, but they all felt like too much, and this is admittedly a very subtle thing, and it's something that you sort of see as the light changes or as you move up and down the street, and we think it is very nice. We think it's appropriate, and we think it works very well. And I think that's really it in terms of public testimony. We appreciated the Victorian Society's enthusiasm for the project.
Great. Thank you. Okay, commissioners, any final questions? All right, let's move to our discussion. Commissioner Chapin, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed, and we'll begin our discussion on the proposal to first demolish the existing one-story commercial building and then to construct this new building in its place. And we will comment on height, massing, scale, design, and details and materials. And the applicants have laid out the history of the site, the district, typologies in the district, and the details of this proposal. So Vice Chair Bland, would you like to start this one?
Of course. First, I think few will miss the existing building. So I think that's an appropriate demolition to take place in this historic district. Secondly, I will venture to say this is among the best, I think, of a series of contemporary infill contextual buildings that I've been able to approve over many years on the commission. I like the thoughtful, intellectualized approach to the whole problem. I think the use of the Peterson handmade brick is terrific. I've used this brick myself. The building will distinguish itself as a contemporary building within the historic district, but it fits so, hand in glove almost, that it will enliven actually its historic neighbor to the right, and be, I suppose, somewhat compatible. I can't remember all the details of the building to the left that is now being built. But I think it will enhance both of those buildings and tell a nice story. Of course, the massing of the building is absolutely appropriate. I have no real interest in kind of pointing out any changes that I would suggest at all. It's in the hands of a very competent architectural team. I will note that the highly academic idea that has been brought up about the void on the upper right will be noticed by not one single person ever, except for the team sitting over here. Does it distract from the ability to read the building, as was suggested in testimony? I doubt it, frankly. I'm not sure it would even be mentioned. So I'm not going to weigh in against that if that's what this highly competent team thinks is an appropriate way. It's kind of innocuous to me. Otherwise, I think it's a terrific scheme altogether, and a very nice addition to a street which is, as been pointed out, has a lot of up and down and in and out and old and new character. Congratulations.
Thank you. Commissioner Master.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with a lot of Commissioner Bland's comments. I think that they've done a wonderful job here. I know it's a challenging task to transition between two adjacent buildings, but I think they've done that well. I like the way that they use the depth in the windows, and then opted not for a cornice on the top to make it a more contemporary interpretation, which I think works. I don't know if I said this, demolition is fine. The height massing scale is fine. I think the material is fine. And Commissioner Bland is right. No one's going to notice the void on the upper, the corner. The one thing I would say is that I appreciate on the ground floor retail, I appreciate what they did in terms of the depth. I think that creates a lot of interest without doing too much in terms of color or adding a cornice. I think it's interesting, and I think it gives it a grounding. So I can find this appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
Demolition of existing building is appropriate. The new building is appropriate. The creative terracotta and brick is really wonderful. The detailing is robust and creative.
Thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is very successful. And my only concern actually is that part of the bulkhead is showing over the front of the building, and 49, I think slide 49. And I know they said they did a lot to reduce that bulkhead. Yeah, it just is unfortunate to have anything showing over the front facade. I don't know if there's anything can be done about that, but I think that the detailing, color in general, echo Commissioner Bland's comments also. But I think in general, it's a great proposal.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum?
Thank you. I agree. It's a nice job. I think that what Mark had been suggesting about the base looking a little bit stubby is probably true, but it doesn't seem to be out of sync with the block, so I don't think it's a problem. I think the brickwork is very nice. I think the Landmarks Commission should get a stipend or a fee every time somebody uses a Peterson brick. They owe us big for the boatloads of clay that they're shipping from Copenhagen to New York just to meet commission standards. But it is beautiful stuff. I agree with Fred completely about that the void. It's kind of, it reminded me like there must be at least a half dozen, if not more, apartment buildings that do this kind of trick where you do a grid and then you kind of like shift in a kind of abstract pattern, left to right, you know. And this, it reminds me of that a little bit. And so I do think it will be lost. It would have been better, like, if they really wanted to push it in, make it a balcony or something, then you'd really get it. But here it's really just like a lost gesture. But it doesn't detract. The one thing I would suggest they look at with staff is that sill detail with the angled brick and then the vertical fascia. That's a detail that you see a lot in the 70s and 80s. And those bricks really look really dirty and gross after a few decades because there's no drip. And you might want to think about that a little bit because it will get gross after a while. But that's nothing to make it inappropriate. Yeah, I think it'll be a nice job. It'll be interesting to see how the brickwork comes out. You know, the jointing looks interesting. Yeah, I think it's a nice job.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I agree with most of my fellow commissioners' statements. I actually think in the right light, that void might actually be visible. And I like it being that subtle, but maybe visible. But and the one other thing is Commissioner Goldblum mentioned, I would love to see an extra foot on the ground floor and taking an inch or two off of each of the upper floors to keep the same height. However, given the proportions of the rest of the block, I think this is fine as is.
Commissioner Chen.
I couldn't agree more with all the comments. I would just note that this is a very, very nice design. I only wish that you could do the same thing for the back facade. I know you must have encountered budget constraints. But Commissioner Ginsburg is right. If you look back on your black and white photograph, the previous photograph, if you compare the previous lower, the base appears taller and more substantive. So to the degree that, you know, in a very capable team, whether you can adjust minutely, maybe that will make the difference because perception-wise, even though it's slightly taller, if you look back to your previous comparison document, the black and white photograph of the previous condition, you will notice that the base was taller. But well done.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. So I think we have enough to approve it as is. We can ask you to explore those floor-to-floor heights. You can continue to do that with the staff as you also work with the staff on all those details, the final brick details. But for our purposes today, I think we'll make a motion to approve it. Mayor Bland.
Yeah, on the matter of 44 West 8th Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District, this is an application to demolish an existing building and construct a new building. I note that the existing building at 44 West 8th Street was originally two buildings, one a 5-story residential structure and one 3-story commercial building that were altered and combined prior to designation, including the removal of the upper floors and extensive facade alterations. I further note that the adjacent blocks on West 8th Street and McDougal Streets feature an eclectic variety of building heights, types, and styles, including 19th century row houses and with altered commercial bases and 20th century loft and apartment buildings. I recommend approval, noting that the existing altered taxpayer building on the site is not one for which the historic district was designated, and therefore its demolition will not detract from the special historic and architectural character of the Greenwich Village Historic District. That the proposed building's 5-story height with 1-story setback penthouse will be consistent with the general height and massing of other buildings in the streetscape. That the 6-bay wide facade will feature patterned brickwork and stepped window surrounds that give scale and articulation to the facade in a manner that reflects the scale and articulation of historic buildings that once occupied the site. That the proposed facade is articulated in a tripartite arrangement of base, shaft, and capital, recalling the typical facade composition of the majority of historic buildings located throughout this historic district. That the proposed materials palette featuring beige, terracotta at the base and penthouse, and red custom brick at the body, and with metal windows and storefronts will harmonize with the masonry materials and finishes of buildings found throughout this historic district. That the proposed detailing at the facades featuring ornamental brickwork laid in a variety of planes and patterns and corbelled brick cornices will provide a level of depth and articulation comparable to what is found on historic buildings within this district, while contributing to the building's contemporary design. That the fenestration pattern at the West 8th Street facade, composed of 2/2 double hung windows, will reference the proportions of repeating bays that are characteristic of 20th century apartment buildings. That the design, configuration, and materials of the ground floor infill include large glazed display windows, excuse me, with metal framing, metal bulwarks, bulkheads, sorry, inset paired entry doors with transoms and signage consisting of bracket signs will harmonize with the ground floor treatments of buildings within the streetscape. That the rooftops, penthouse, stair, and elevator bulkheads and mechanical equipment minimally visible over the front facade and clearly visible from the east and west on 8th Street will have a simple design and silhouette and neutral gray standing seam metal cladding that will render them visually comparable to rooftop accretions found on other large buildings throughout the historic district. That the rear facade will feature a high solid to void ratio with simply designed fenestration pattern and color palette that will be in keeping with typical rear facades of buildings within the historic district, and that the proposed building will enhance the special architectural character of the Greenwich Village Historic District. I'll note also that you will work with staff conceivably to adjust slightly the height of the first floor and work, if possible, to reduce the visibility of the bulkhead at the roof.
I think we actually had 6 who were fine with visibility of the bulkhead.
Oh, all right. So you don't need to work on that at all.
Unless you wish to, of course. All right. Commissioner Master, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, Mark?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
With 8 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that concludes our day, and we will see people next week at our public hearing of June 11th. Thank you all for your participation today.